looking at the New York Times versus Coinbase, the failed New York Times fake news. Sorry, I'm just channeling Trump there. Okay, failed New York Times fake.
Well, talk
news.
about whining. This is more virtue signaling whining by the New York Times. And actually, look, this was clearly a hit piece because they don't like Brian Armstrong's decision to make Coinbase an apolitical workplace. If any workplace has chosen to be political, it's the New York Times. There's a lot of examples of that. The fact
they ran
that
Bari Weiss out of there.
They ran Bari Weiss out of the newsroom. I mean, these are the most
editor page out.
That's right. I mean, they ran James Bennett out of there for publishing an op-ed by Tom Cotton. Remember that? He got kicked out. He got forced to resign because he published one op-ed by a Republican senator. Okay. This is the most closed-minded group, the most closed-minded political workplace. And here they are lecturing a Silicon Valley company that in their view isn't tolerant enough. I mean, it's ridiculous. But and it was obvious that it was a hit piece. The stories, the examples in the article were years old. They weren't even reported to HR as violations at the time. So there's, it's people cooking up things that weren't reported as problems at the time. But the really interesting thing about the story, I think, is the way Coinbase reacted to it by preemptively announcing that it was coming, which really made the New York Times reporters really irate. They called it extremely unprofessional.
The reporters were upset, and they threatened that they would no longer. The journalist said, "If you guys are going to front run our stories, we are not going to call you when we have a story." And I responded to that, and I was like, "Are you serious? Like, you're literally going to lose what little integrity you have left about fact checking?" Because
there's an amazing
somebody wrote a preemptive blog post about it.
I'll say this about Brian Armstrong. I have a lot of respect for him for making a stand. I think every CEO has that right, and I'm glad that at the end of the day, the employees at Coinbase were given a humane way of making a decision to be on the same page with him or not. I will also say that I thought that essay was not well written, and that given the chance, I could have rewritten that for him in a much better way. I've maintained this the whole time. But I think he's in the right here.
Wrap it up, David. Tell us what you think.
Well, okay, that's interesting that Chamath is. It's interesting to hear your support for Brian. So we've talked about this has become a recurring topic on the pod. But anyway, I think the important thing is the way that I think the tech community fought back against this hit piece. And it was like you said, Jason, the front running of the story. Somebody, a wag on Twitter had a great comment saying, he basically said, I try to walk up. I agree with the New York Times on this. I try to walk up to somebody and kick them in the nuts, and they covered their groin. How dare they? How unprofessional of them.
It was a slow motion kick to the nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And so
it's coming Sunday. It's right, but Wednesday. But on Sunday, we're kicking you on the nuts.
So yeah, the New York Times the Coinbase just covered his groin so the New York Times can kick him in the nuts. And of course the reporters all went hysterical about that. But it was a really brilliant PR tactic by Coinbase, because what it did is it almost like released a spike protein, by sort of pre-announcing the New York Times story. It created this spike protein that trained the immune system of Silicon Valley to be ready for this pathogenic New York Times story. And the story just really fell flat. It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it was, and they did the same thing with the Away CEO. She was too hard on people in Slack. All of these stories, to go full circle, involve some leak from a Slack room. So if you're a CEO or you're managing anybody, don't have any difficult or legal issues discussed on Slack. Just go for a walk with somebody, talk to them face to face, because you're going to get destroyed. All right, listen, everybody.